Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today, I've got someone who is very, very special to me. She's someone that I met in kind of an interesting way, and she's somebody who just has such great stuff to offer. And we're kind of cut from the same cloth in that we both just love the science and the neurobiology of communication and leadership. So with me today is my dear, dear friend, Fiona Murden. And Fiona actually is, in my life, she's a great example of one of the best things I think about writing a book. Great reason to write a book. I wrote the your amazing itty bitty guide to being TED worthy, 15 secrets of neurobiology, to be more effective when you're communicating with people. And Fiona actually found that book on Amazon, got that book, read it, and thought that it was good enough that she wanted to reach out and work with me. And that was just something that I had never really thought of before. And it was such an exciting experience for me to know that somebody out there that I had never met was reading my book. And now she's one of my dearest friends. So Fiona, thanks a lot for taking the time. I know you're super busy. I really appreciate you joining us today on Speak Like a Leader Show. Welcome.
Thank you so much, John. Well, I know you're super busy as well. Super, super busy. Yeah. So but that's exactly it, isn't it? I read the book and I was like, I've read lots of books on TED Talks and communication. And I thought, I'll try another one. And I was reading it. I was like, oh, I really like this. Oh, this is really good. Oh, wow, this is fantastic. And he thinks the same sorts of things I do and the things I've written about in my book. But then I thought when I contacted you, I thought, he might think that in my book I copied him because we think in such a similar way. I think I'd already published my book by then. But
yes, well, and you're the author of both Defining You and Mirror Thinking. And, yes, we have a lot of similarities, but I think I definitely know that you did your stuff before you read my stuff. And I, wrote my book and was doing my stuff before I bumped into you. But the overlap is thrilling. I think it's really, really fun.
It's fabulous. And then I looked you up. I watched you on a few things. I thought he seems like a really nice guy. And I reached out and you replied, and you are a really, really, really nice guy.
That's awesome. Well, and I was so excited to hear from you and meet you.
Oh, I think we had great fun. You were an incredible help with shaping my TED Talk and getting me to a place where I could deliver it. I found it hard because it wasn't in front of an audience. And I don't think of myself as a performer, but what I've realised since lockdown has finished in the UK and I've spoken in front of people again, I am a bit of a performer because I enjoy the live audience and it gives me an adrenaline rush and it helps amp me up to deliver. Yeah, I found it really hard doing it to camera, which was what we had to do in lockdown.
Yeah. It was very just because I've kind of skipped over it at the beginning. Fiona is the author of Defining You and Mirror Thinking. She's also the founder of Oka.life. That's OKA.life, which is a premier mentoring platform that matches mentors to mentees using behavioral science. You can also find her at aroka.co.uk, which is AROKA.co.uk, and her website, FionaMurden.com, FionaMurden.com. Find her on LinkedIn.com at /in/Fiona Murden. So same as the website. And you can find her TEDx talk from the London School of Economics that has actually been pulled up to TED.com. So I'll put the link to that in the show notes. But if you do a search for Fiona Murden, How Unexpected Role Models Make Us Human, you'll find her TEDx talk that's actually streaming now from TED.com. There you go. Yeah, surprise, Fiona.
I'm very surprised. Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, and and listen, so let's talk about that first thing, just because we're there. You gave that talk in the midst of the COVID pandemic and lockdown and everything, and when I watch it, I think it's really good. And I think one thing that is interesting based on what you said is that I feel like you kind of build to it. It starts a little bit slow, not slow like boring, but it starts out like you're kind of feeling your way a little bit. I actually thought that given the topic and what you were talking about, it actually worked out really well. And I can totally get that, I think for all of us being in front of just this black eye of a camera, it's just not the same as being with other human beings. I mean, we like to be with human beings, right?
I mean, it's amazing the connection we have with other people when we're doing things like that. The other thing I think was really hard was I felt I had to remember it word for word, whereas when I give a talk, it might go slightly, as I'd say, off-piste, but that's okay because you're reading the audience and you can see if they look a bit lost and you can pull it back again. So I guess the thing is, it's made me appreciate how to really weave a story together, which that's what you taught me, was how to really unwrap it and to pull things back in as you go through, which I think builds the intrigue and the interest, which was a lesson that I will take forevermore wherever I go in terms of things like that. Now, that doesn't mean I'll always have time to prepare a talk in that way.
Right.
But it's, I'm giving a talk to a leadership team next week, I think it is. And I'm thinking of all the things you taught me. And I think
that's great.
For anyone, I'm sure people listening have seen your stuff, but for anyone, it's well worth visiting your book, and visiting your talks and the information that you offer, because it's critical to be able to communicate impactfly.
Yeah. You remind me of a little thing that I did a blog post about. I kind of modified this from one of my clients. I work with a woman who just barely is in the midst of leaving. But she's the, head of HR for all of this big company, Boston Scientific, and they have a saying there, pie. And I changed that to yipe because I like yipe better. So here's yipe. Yipe is your impact. So YIPE, your impact, your performance, and your exposure. Okay, so YIPE, YIPE, your impact, performance, and exposure. Now, your performance is what you're doing all the time. Like that's what someone at a big organization, that's them doing their job. That's their performance, right? They're performing every day. They do tasks. They work 16 hours a day. So that's what they're doing. Then there's their exposure moment, which is that 5 minutes, that 15 minutes maybe in front of the board of directors or in front of leadership or, in front of the analysts or whatever it is, right? That is a teeny tiny, itty bitty fraction of the time that they spend doing that performance, right? They're actually doing their job. But what they're doing in their job times their exposure multiplied by their exposure equals your impact, right? Your impression is the word, your impression, right? So the impression that you make is a function of all of that performance and then that teeny tiny exposure moment. So if you're doing $1 million work, but your exposure moment is a 0.5, now everybody thinks you're doing, the impression you make is that you're doing $500,000 work, but you're actually doing $1 million work. Now, if it goes the other way and that exposure moment is a 10, well, now you're doing $1 million work, but it seems like you're doing $10 million work. And I know which kind of impression I'd rather have. But here's the hard part. Until people get this, until they really let that sink in, people have a very hard time stepping out of what they think is their performance stuff, doing their job, into some preparation time for that exposure, right? But preparing for that exposure is part of your job, because that exposure moment is really important to everyone. Most importantly, probably you and your impression that you make, right? So I think that giving this kind of thing its due, and I think you did that. You know, I know how hard you worked for this TEDx talk, and I think it's fabulous, and it's online forever. Right?
Mhm.
So it's worth that time.
Yeah, it's scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what you're saying is really true. It's really interesting, and I will say that to leaders when I wouldn't not articulately like you have, and not with the nice example. I like yipe; it's really cool. I mean, I already quote your insightful vulnerability and say my friend John Bates says.
Oh, thank you.
But I've got another one now. I think, you know, it even for youngsters, it's like when they go for a job interview,
Yeah.
they're presenting their life in an hour or 45 minutes.
Yes.
And that presentation is, which bits of your life do you want to highlight to that person? How do you want to come across to that person? Because if
Yes.
you only talk about when you messed something up and you fell apart, that's what they're going to think you are. If you only talk about when you did brilliantly, that's probably false as well. So it's like,
Right.
how do you get a true picture of the true message across? And it feels, I think with interviews, with performances, when it comes to public speaking, it might feel like it's contrived, but it's not. It's actually saying which bits of my puzzle that make up me and my life or my performance do I want to share, and
Yeah.
how.
Yes. And to give that stuff, I think what you're saying is absolutely right, Fiona. I think a lot of times people feel like they need to just walk in and kind of wing it, right? And be with whatever comes up, and if they were to prepare, it might be somehow inauthentic. No, not at all. The preparation honors that 45 minutes that you have around this interview that is going to go one way or another and dramatically impact your life either way, right?
Yeah.
So that preparation and that thinking it through for yourself and taking the time to make sure that the interviewer has a great experience with you because you've really thought about it and you can lay it out in a way that makes it very clear for them. That's actually generous and courageous, I think.
Yeah. And it reminds me of a saying that another friend of mine uses, Kenny Wilson, who's the chief exec of Doc Martens. And Kenny says, every time he goes into the office, he doesn't think, what do I have to do today? He thinks, how do I have to be today?
That's so good.
And it is, isn't it? Because what you're saying, the performance every day is the doing. But in that moment, it's how you being.
Yes. Yeah. We think of ourselves, I think, unexamined as human doings. But listen to the name. I remember the first time it dawned on me. We are called human beings. Whoa.
Yeah.
I was just mind blown when that first landed on me. And I think I was pretty old already. I was probably in my 40s.
I think I was as well when I realised that. And as a psychologist, you'd expect I might have done beforehand. But I agree with you. It's absolutely mind-blowing. It's kind of obvious, but it's not.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your work. And I know that you came to your work through kind of a moment of realization, right? I think a lot of people that are listening know that I lost a company after we raised over $80 million. We lost our company in the dot-com crash. I almost died of an autoimmune disease, had this intense experience as I thought I was going to die that really changed my life and the course of my life. And you had a moment, maybe not almost going to die, but you had one of those moments of realization, an intimate epic, something big happening right between your ears that took you off the path you were on and got you onto the path of what you're doing now. Will you tell us that story?
I won't be able to remember exactly as I did it in TED, but what I can tell you is that it was a grey day in London, and I had just come back from a skiing holiday, bluebird days, hanging out with my brother, laughing with friends and what have you. And I was walking along the River Thames. It was so cold, but the type of cold in England is this damp that really gets in your bones. So I just come from the mountains where it was colder, but I didn't feel as cold. And so it all adds to this feeling of oppression and like, really, I have to now go back and sit in a small office behind a laptop doing the same thing, which was consulting. And, it was a job that was aspirational, which was with a big company. And it was hard to get into, but I hated it. I didn't hate the people. I didn't hate what I learned there, but I just thought, what am I doing? This just isn't me. This isn't what I should be doing with my life. And it's then that I thought, right, I'm surrounding myself with the wrong type of vibe, I'm pushing against what feels right for me. I'm pushing against the environment. I shouldn't be in this environment. I'm not surrounded by lovely people, but not the right people. And so stepped out and went back to university to study occupational psychology. And I've absolutely loved my career since then. I think the thing that I've been striving for most, though, is how do I give back? Which, writing books does it to an extent. But as a friend pointed out to me, Fiona, people from disadvantaged backgrounds are not necessarily going to pick your books up and do what it says. I'm like, aha, that's a very good point. And so that's where it's led to launching this most recent endeavor around mentoring, because mentoring's hugely powerful in terms of creating social mobility, improving well-being, enabling STEM within minority populations, sort of enabling aspirations and progression into STEM careers. So, and then within organizations, it's great for well-being, it's great for diversity and inclusion, all those things and more. So I feel very passionate about mentoring.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Well, and that mentoring and your story, you talk a lot about kind of what was going on underneath and what is going on underneath all that stuff in mirror thinking, right? Give us a little bit of an insight into mirror thinking and how that applies to what you just said.
So mirror thinking is how role models make us human. And it's taking a look, like you say, under the bonnet at some of the neuroscience, but some of the social psychology and all the different things that shape us. And the fact that 95% or more of our cognitive activity is unconscious.
Whoa. Say that again. Yeah. I know this, but even just hearing it now, I'm like, wait a minute, say it again.
I know. I always feel like I need to check myself on that one, but 95% or more of our cognitive activity is unconscious.
Unconscious. Whoa.
Yeah. And so there are things like learning to talk, learning to walk, learning how to use a knife and fork. Oh, that rhymes. That sounds good, doesn't it?
Bingo, yeah. You got the Fiona Murden rap coming on
cool. Here. I don't think I can carry that one off. But everything about being human we take for granted, but is actually a large proportion of what our brain is programmed with. So we've got our limbic system, which is more pre-programmed, but then we've got the prefrontal cortex and other areas of our brain, which are filled with things around our culture, our beliefs, our values, how to talk, how to respond, how to read other people's intentions, how to put ourselves into other people's shoes and have empathy. So very much fundamental to being human is all stuff that we kind of take for granted, but it's stuff we're learning, and we're learning it from the people around us.
Yeah.
All the time.
You talk about the example of a woman named Oksana.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Oksana. It's. I've been thinking a lot about Oksana because Oksana was actually from the Ukraine, and I am.
She's from Ukraine.
From Ukraine. Sorry, goodness, yes.
That's okay. The
From
Kiev
Ukraine.
Independent.
We've done this before as well, John. I should know by now. Apologies to anyone from Ukraine who's listening. I'm sure you've got much more threatening and fundamental things to do, but
right now for sure.
Yeah. Oksana Malaya was born in a small rundown village in Ukraine, and the story goes that her parents, too drunk to care, left her outside when she was just a toddler. And she looked for warmth and curled up with feral dogs that roamed the area. And she wasn't found it wasn't reported to the authorities until 7 years later, by which time she was walking on all fours, scavenging for food, eating like a dog, barking like a dog. She couldn't speak. She didn't walk on two legs. She walked on her legs and hands. And I think that the stark realization there is, of course, she'd been deprived of a huge amount of social nurturing as well as social interaction. But we take for granted that someone that went through that, of course, they wouldn't be able to add up. They wouldn't be able to multiply sums. They wouldn't be able to write and spell. But we forget that things like learning to talk and walk, we are learning from the moment we're born from the people around us.
Yeah.
Typically our parents or whoever our main caregivers are.
Yeah. So that mirroring is something that starts immediately and never ends. And so in that setting where you were a consultant and you were around lovely people, but you just weren't around you weren't in a setting where you wanted to continue to mirror everything that was around you, right?
Absolutely. I was passionate about people, about helping people to, I wouldn't have called it this then, but fulfill their potential.
Yeah.
And we were working with systems and trying to meet deadlines and all good things, all great things, but they weren't the things that I needed to model based on where I'd got to in life and my values and my beliefs and all those things.
Well, and you and I have, I think, we have a lot of similarities. I mean, I think, we're clear about that. But when you were little, you have a story about your grandfather that I think is interesting and illustrative and fun. Will you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a picture of me that I treasure and I have in my bedside table. I probably should have it on my bedside table. And it's me with a big fedora on my head and big black rimmed glasses sat crooked on my nose, and my granddad looking back at me with my little cherry embossed hat perched on the top of his head, and he's smiling, beaming. And the family story goes that it was the first time he'd smiled since my nana had died. And there was always this story around I could feel what other people were feeling and I could connect with them like that. Now, I don't know how true that bit is. It's nice to think that was how I was.
Well, I think you still are like that.
Oh, thank you. But the question is, did I become like that because I was told I was like that?
Good question, right?
So
very good
chicken
question.
and egg, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I guess for me, all through my teenage years as well, I was very much feeling other people's pain, wanting to solve other people's problems. And I guess one thing that's helped with me studying psychology is not helping myself because I'm still screwy. But I've become better at being able to step away and feel in a way that we'd call cognitive empathy rather than emotional empathy.
Yeah.
So when the emotional empathy is where you become totally overwhelmed by what other people are feeling, the cognitive empathy is taking that, processing that, and taking that step back and saying, I'm still going to help you. I'm still going to care. I'm still going to support, but I'm not going to be consumed by what you're feeling.
which I think is a much more functional and useful approach anyway, ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a step or two to accomplishing that you could
Quite a few
give people?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd love to be. That's one thing I would actually. I have ambitions to be able to more clearly break down for people, because it's not as simple as, oh, I think I will think in a cognitively empathic way now. But I mean, for me, it was an experience where I became too involved with one of my first clients as a psychologist, and very quickly had to learn that you do not do that, and painfully came crashing down on me. But it's that, I mean, the thing I would liken it to is when you're in a bad mood. So if you're feeling really annoyed, like, and you want to shout at someone, but you stop yourself shouting at them. It's like that. So the empathy, the emotional empathy, is the bit where it says, I'm feeling this emotion, want to shout, and I'm going to shout. Whereas the cognitive empathy takes it into the prefrontal cortex. It's believed that's where it actually takes place in the brain. In the same way as that decision not to shout at someone moves you away from your emotion and into your prefrontal cortex. And I think there are useful ways of thinking about it around some of the ACT, so acceptance and commitment therapy, if people are really interested in exploring that. ACT Great. With Russ Harris, Professor Todd Kashdan, George Mason. They do some really interesting work on all of this stuff.
Okay, cool. So so let's talk about, let's talk a little bit more about your passion for mentoring and mentees and things like that. Like let's say that I'm an entrepreneur. Let's say that I'm working at a large organization. Let's say that I'm somebody who's listening to this show. What are some key thoughts about mentoring and successful mentoring and setting that up in my organization if I don't have that already?
So setting it up is really important. And while we're providing the software and the tools, I'm still going in and helping guide how it should be set up, both in terms of what leaders are communicating and in terms of what HR is communicating. Because I think we take it as, mentoring, it's really natural, isn't it? It's like we're learning from one another, but forget that actually there's a whole load of things about our world that aren't natural. And so we have to take consideration of things that we might not otherwise. The key thing I would say is to communicate that if you're taking on mentoring as a mentor and a mentee, you have to be committed.
Yeah.
And this is where you see the difference between a mentoring program having massive impact and a mentoring program only working with the people that were high potential anyway. So they were going to take it and do something good with it. In a non-organizational setting, losing or not paying attention to that commitment piece can actually mean that there are more negative outcomes than if you didn't put mentoring in the first place. So with youth mentoring, there was a scheme set up in Northeast England, and when mentors were not trained and they weren't committed, the rates of criminology and crime rates and levels of depression and anxiety and negative outcomes increased in youth populations when they'd been exposed to mentoring that didn't work.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I could imagine that they get paired with somebody who seems way better off than they are, who seems like they've got a lot going on and have it figured out. And then that person ends up not being committed to them. That could be really damaging.
Yeah. It erodes self-esteem and self-belief and hope, and consistency. And whilst we think about, in a big business, it doesn't matter so much. Well, it still does. And whilst the impacts won't be as dramatic, they are still going to be damaging and can really upset. And so there's etiquette. That's another thing. There's etiquette over how to end it if it's not effective. I mean, I talk about the 3 C's. So it's commitment, curiosity, and connection. So you're committed to doing it. You remain curious and open-minded. You explore. You don't think you know the answers. You don't assume that you know more than that person. You're curious and you help them explore. You're in that space with them. And you really connect. So you make the effort to put yourself in their shoes. And by doing those things as a mentor, it actually improves your mental health, your social and emotional skills, your EQ, your leadership, your communication, your relationship building, all of those things. So it's really, really beneficial, not just to the mentee, but to the mentor.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous. So, so what are some of the things about mirror neurons that maybe we don't think about enough? Does anything come up when when I ask that? Like, what do being the person who wrote the book Mirror Thinking, what are some of the less realized aspects of this that might make a difference for people?
I think that the social and emotional skills are being built throughout life. So we tend to have an assumption that once we're no longer a teenager, we're learning, but we're learning because we're reading or we're watching that documentary or we're listening to that person speak. No, we're learning every moment of every day. And actually you're more likely to go with the crowd and be influenced by the crowd and conform as an adult who's not aware of that than you are as an adult who is keeping their sort of awareness and thinking, hang on a minute, I've just bought the same car as my next door neighbor. And things,
right.
Because, you'll see it. If you look in a neighborhood, people have similar cars.
Right.
People wear similar types of clothes. People send their kids to the same sorts of schools. And those are all things around the mirror neuron happening the whole time.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest danger is that we remain unconscious of it. So we're not taking, we're not taking advantage of it. And B, we're not fine tuning our own social and emotional skills, which we have the opportunity to do throughout life.
Yeah.
Which then has that positive impact back on us, well-being, our relational skills, all those sorts of things.
So combining that with the fact that 95% of our cognitive stuff is unconscious, what's some of your advice for how to manage for that? Like, I got to imagine, the first thing that comes to my mind is manage your inputs, right? Like right now we're talking during the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And one of the inputs that I have to dial down a little bit more is my news input on that. Like I hadn't thought about the fact that have been sort of obsessing about this and feeding all that stuff into my brain and then letting 95% of what I do with it be unconscious. That just can't be good, right?
No.
I mean, I think it's important for all of us to be aware and pay attention and know what's going on. I think we got to do that. But I think that there's only so much that I can do about any particular thing. Let me do what I can and then control the input around that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's also remembering, because we can sit here and say this now, but then no doubt you and I will forget and turn the news on.
Right.
And so it sounds really simplistic, but when I'm working with leaders, I'll say, what are you going to do to remember? What is going to remind you? And that a reminder for you at the moment, John, is to step away from the news a bit. And we talked about meditating more. Yeah. Whereas a reminder for me would be to really listen when my kids are speaking. So when I'm sort of busy trying to do other things, it's actually, no, just stop and listen to them. So we all have different things that are high on our list of what we actually want, but we need to check in on those and see how we're doing against them.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some other aspects of out of mirror thinking that leaders could use and apply in their leadership?
I think for leaders, it's interesting because you say, well, who are your role models? And this is one of the where this came from. Because firstly, a lot of the leaders I speak to, I say, well, you're a role model. Oh, no, I'm not a role model. It's like, no, seriously, you are.
Yeah, that's so funny.
And so, we're all role models, but then you put on top of the factors that amplify it, our success, our positional power, our prestige, those things all add to it. Plus the fact that, they're probably, well, if I tend to work with nice people. So they're nice people, they're likable, which makes them even more influential.
Yeah.
So there's recognizing that and thinking about, well, what impact am I having? And is it the impact I want to be having?
Mm-hmm.
Then there's using other aspects of the mirror system. So visualization. Visualization is so powerful because our brain doesn't really know, we believe, the difference between reality and visualized reality. Yeah. So how do you want to be? How do you want to come across?
Yeah.
You sit and visualize that. Think about it.
Which is way better than worry, because worry is just negative visualization.
Mm-hmm. And visualization doesn't work for everyone. There's other things that you could say. The other thing that I often hear leaders say is, I don't have any role models anymore because I'm at the top of the tree. It's like, okay, so do you think you're a better communicator than Martin Luther King? Do you think you're a better communicator than Barack Obama? And you start going through, well, of course I don't. No. And what about negotiator? Are you a better, And so then it's saying, okay, who would you like to be like in these aspects? Who would you aspire to be like? And picking out, it doesn't have to be one person, like when we're little and we think, I want to be like him or her. It's saying, I think I really respect and admire that person for their communication skills. Yeah. I really respect that person for their diplomacy. And pick out the bits that you feel you want to emulate.
Yeah.
And then watch videos of them. Listen to them speaking. Read their books, because you're basically filling your brain with the right inputs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's really great. I love that. And it is pretty funny how leaders don't always fully get the 360 nature of their leadership, right? Oh, I'm not a role model. Yeah, of course you are.
Yeah.
We mirror up the hierarchy like crazy. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So you're a role model whether you like it or not. We all are. But there's that amplification effect of the more senior you get, the more that becomes amplified.
Yeah. Well, and I love the idea of, because I think initially when I think mirror neurons, I think, oh, me in person with somebody or with people and we're mirroring each other. But as you get up, to those senior levels of leadership, you can surround yourself, and I say that with quotation marks, you can surround yourself with other fabulous leaders, and they don't even have to still be alive.
Yeah.
Right? You can go see their videos if they were around to do videos. You can certainly read their books and use your mirror system to emulate the pieces of that you like. And now you're old enough and grown up enough that hopefully you can put some choice to that and mirror the parts you like and leave the rest of it. And what a fabulous way to think about growth and development, who out of all of history do I want to mirror?
And if you think about someone like Mandela, that's what he did when he was incarcerated. He read and read and read about leaders from across history. He wrote to leaders and read their letters back to himself. All of those factors, he was soaking up everything. Yeah. And he came out as someone who'd started off trying to create solutions and resolutions using terrorism, to someone that did it in one of the most profoundly humanitarian, as far probably not the right wording, but just he became someone who was patient and tolerant and caring and got the solution that way. But he did that through remaining curious and open-minded.
Yeah. He was committed, he was curious, and he connected even from prison with leaders he wanted to emulate and learn from.
And so some of that's the mentoring piece as well. And I was talking to a lady about this last week. She's about to get what's probably the most senior position in her career. There's nowhere to go after this. And I was saying, right, what's your board of mentors? So who are the peers? You know, if it feels too hard, because sometimes it feels too effortful to sort of, you know, put things together like that and read a book and all that. It's like, well, just put meetings in your diary and say, I respect this person, this person, this person. I am going to meet with them every 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And then it's another way of mirroring those positive and constructive aspects, but having support from outside of your organization.
Yeah. That's fabulous. I think that's a great, great idea. And I got to imagine that the most successful leaders have some structure like that in place.
And unfortunately, I was just thinking when you were talking, and I don't mean to bring it back to this, but I'm going to, Putin has surrounded himself with people who mirror his behavior. And that, unfortunately, has amplified to him a way of believing that what he is doing is somehow right. Yeah. Which, you know, for the rest of the world and a lot of Russians sort of sitting there going, what on earth? But he created that echo chamber of people who mirrored him and mirrored back what he wanted to hear. So it can work both ways. It can work in a really positive way. It can also be very, very dangerous.
Well, and, you know, and I think that is one of the things that I talk with leaders about on a regular basis. And, you know, I talk about it as the problem of being a charismatic leader, right? If you're a leader and you're at all charismatic, which most leaders are in one way or another, then, and you're likable, like you said, Fiona, you know, a lot of the leaders that you and I get to work with, they're just super nice, likable, great people. And they've got something about them that, you know, seems special. And people don't want to tell a charismatic leader bad news. No. They don't want to make a charismatic leader unhappy. And then if you got a charismatic leader who's going to kill you if you tell them something, that, you know, that doesn't help either. But, you know, most of the people that you and I are talking to are far from that. But even that really nice person who's charismatic and, you know, fun and a great leader, it's very hard for people to tell that leader something bad. And I think that's, to go back to one of the phrases that you brought up earlier, Fiona, it's one of the things I think is so important about insightful vulnerability. Because as a leader, if you practice insightful vulnerability and you make it okay and you normalize that you can talk about where you failed as long as you bring a solution, right? Insightful vulnerability, then your organization can mirror that, right? And and it makes it easier to bring up the tough stuff and talk about where we didn't do it as well as we would have liked to, and where we might be about to make a mistake, because that's part of the culture. And when you do it, they can mirror it.
Yep, without even realizing that's what they're doing, because 95% or more of our cognitive activity is unconscious.
Yeah, gosh, that is just such a wild one. It's such a.
But what you're saying is really interesting too, because there is the hubristic factor that comes into play. And I often tell first-time CEOs when they're going into that first-time role, you need to be conscious of this. You need to be aware of this if you don't want to fall into the trap, because it's not good for anyone, including them. You need to have people you know will feel able to tell you the truth, and you need to give them the right messaging around what that looks like.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think any of us like it in the moment. Most of us do not love to have someone say, oh, that's not going to work, or this isn't a good idea, or hey, I got to tell you what you're doing is totally wrong. But that's the most important thing to keep getting better, right? And to stay on track doing well is acknowledging the things that aren't working and having people on your team that aren't going to let them slip by.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, so Fiona, we have a few more minutes. What haven't I asked you about that you've been thinking about, or that you'd like to talk about, or that you think the listeners could really benefit from?
I don't know. I think I don't know. I don't think I could share everything that's going on in my brain, to be honest. I don't think it would benefit the listeners one bit. I mean, I could tell you more about how I see Oka creating, hopefully, social change.
Let's talk about that. I would love to hear that. So this is Oka, which is oka.life, which is your premier mentoring platform. So tell us a little bit more about that and about the difference that you intend to make with this.
And it's very kind. I think you put the premiere in, but I appreciate that very much. So the difference is there's a lot of matching software out there, but it doesn't match based on behavioral science or personality factors. And the reason that is more optimal is it's more likely that people are going to get something from the relationship if they are matched based on those factors, which then supercharges the results. And, the results within organizations are quite incredible in terms of there's things from succession to promotion to the things that I care more about, which are well-being, diversity and inclusion. But then the societal impacts can be absolutely dramatic as well. There's one stat, I won't be able to find it now, or maybe I will. One US study showed that every $1 invested in quality youth mentoring programs returns at least $3 to benefits to benefit to the society more broadly. It makes sense. It lifts people. It provides opportunities. It enables people to see things through different eyes. If someone's from a disadvantaged background and they've got a mentor who's not, to a mentor, it may seem obvious. Well, you ask that person, or you go to your interview wearing that. Those things aren't obvious to someone who is from a disadvantaged background.
Right.
But then you add in the fact that if you do mentoring properly, and this is the most powerful thing, someone feels believed in.
Yeah.
And we all know that if we feel believed in, it can be absolutely transformational.
I mean, Fiona, I think I've told you the story. You actually, I hadn't really thought about it till now, but you guys kind of look a little bit alike, and you remind me in some ways of Melinda Richter, who is the global head of Johnson & Johnson Innovations J Labs. And the first time that I worked with her, she was my first really big deal client, more than a decade ago. And after our first session, which she was convinced she didn't need, she told me later, she's like, I totally didn't want to come to that. I thought I didn't need you. And I was like doing everything I could to get out of it. But then they said I had to, so I did. At the end of that session, she just looked at me and told me how much she believed in me and how awesome she thought what I did was, and that she wanted to keep me around and introduce me to all her close. And I remember just hearing that, and I was like, whoa, because I still didn't really know what I had or if I made a difference or any of that stuff. I was still really early days and very, very insecure about it all. And she just told me flat out, she thought I was awesome. And I remember walking out on a cloud, and it's the reason that I'm still doing this today, because anytime the going got rough and I was tempted to stop believing in myself, I would reach back into the file and play that tape. And Melinda Richter just transformed my entire life by believing in me like that. So I've experienced that, and it changed my life,
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful example of it. And it's, however, even the most confident person,
Yes,
will feel good and feel better and feel more able if someone else believes in them.
yes,
And mentoring done right, like that study says, quality mentoring can deliver huge benefits back to the economy as well. And it makes sense because it helps people progress within life. It improves life outcomes. It improves earning potential. All those sorts of things.
yeah,
So what I'm hoping to do is we're creating something that will be commercially successful so that we can offer it to third sector organizations at reduced cost or at cost or however that plays out, to help as many people as possible. But it's not just the matching piece, it's then the behavioral science around the tools. So we're supporting people, whether they're mentors or mentees, to sort of build out their personal professional development toolkit. So I know, for example, you know this, John, if I get excited, I talk over people. That sounds really simple, but that needs to be one of my reminders, one of my flags. So it's putting, I put that in somewhere. I'm putting that somewhere. And I haven't, say I had a mentoring session and my mentor told me something really valuable. I'm putting that somewhere. So it starts collecting things, but it's also tools that we know are evidence-based. So things like, I've got a big talk coming up, and you talk about the monkey, do you? Is it the monkey?
I do.
Yeah. So we know that that's actually evidence-based in terms of the methodology. The science behind it is being able to label something enables us to step back. It removes us from the limbic system thinking and pushes us into the prefrontal lobe thinking, where we can actually make a conscious decision, conscious. And so having those sorts of tools on there as well means that people can build up, because, you know, someone might say, well, that one doesn't work for me, but that one over there is really, really helpful. And I don't want to forget to use that tool next time I have a talk, next time I have an interview, next time I have to speak to the board, next time, blah, 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 blah. So it's really doing that so that within the professional or work setting, hopefully it'll help people. But then we know that what we're giving to the broader population, less advantaged population, maybe they can get some of what I think everyone deserves.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like, I mean, it sounds like it would turn this into a pretty cool repository for someone for their growth and development. And they could look back and say, oh, wow, look at that. You know,
exactly.
I've really taken ground in talking over people is just not my number one issue anymore. You know, now I can take on something higher level and see their progress and also have reminders and keep it all in existence.
And we slip back, don't we? We slip back when we're under pressure, or we slip back if we go into a pandemic and don't see people face to face. You know, and it's, I mean, for me, it's like I'd never felt it was fair that leaders get this amount of attention and investment. And it's important because they're, as we said, their behavior is amplified. But what about Joe Blogs? What about the person on the street? And I think everyone deserves access to the right information. And there's a lot of misinformation out there, which also worries me because, like, you know, with two daughters, the eldest one looking at social media, she'll come in and say, "Did you know?" And you're like, "Oh no."
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. So it's going to be a trusted place, a safe place where it's got, you know, safe relationships, safe information. But sorry, I was thinking about, on your point, it's things like EQ. We'll measure that over time. So we can see what's impacting someone's EQ, and we can see what's going to help them to turn the volume up on it when they need to. Or we might be able to get to the point where we can warn them and say, hang on a minute, you've had 4 quite stressful days. You're likely to snap at this person. It's not going to be a good idea. So we're going to build in all sorts of stuff like that as well.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Like a mentor in your pocket too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, Fiona, I know that we're coming up on time here, and I want to respect your time, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. Anything else that you'd like to say before we go? Anything? I'll just say, I think oka.life, that's going to be going live soon.
Well, it's already live, but not to the public. So at the moment, it's business to business. Okay. We're building it out with businesses until we get the model really robust, and then we will flip it to D2C, as they call it now, I think.
So people can go bookmark it and check back, and that sounds good. And I want to just say thanks for everything that you do. I'm glad you had that moment walking down the Thames, you walking next to the Thames there, and that you followed your instinct and intuition and took that leap. Just to make the point, I mean, that must have been kind of a scary, hard leap, right? Like, because you had this really cool job that it seemed like everybody wanted, and you should be happy with it. And what are you thinking? You're going to go back to school and right?
Yeah, I mean, you start questioning yourself, I think, when you're not happy somewhere. You start thinking, is it me? Am I, But it was also a case of I was on a very good salary, and I'd been headhunted for jobs on a bigger salary. And I was going to say, I'm starting from scratch. I'm going back to, it's not just not earning for a year. It was saying, when I do start in my new career, I'm starting right back at the bottom again. And I probably won't earn as much as I did before.
Yeah.
But it was.
So that's a hard thing to say, to do, that's a hard thing to say no to, is like bigger raises and salaries and things, but you did it.
But I think what's interesting is we were maybe brought up more on the model of like ambition and scale, and whereas today 20-something-year-olds are really, really passionate about having meaning and purpose in their work, which is fantastic.
Yes. It drives old people crazy.
So maybe I'm catching up with
fabulous too.
The 20-year-olds,
Yeah, you're catching up with the future, right?
Yeah. But it I think now I don't think it would be such a big thing at all. I think it would actually be something that was like, cool, you're changing. Yeah.
Yeah. But at the time, you did that in the face of real pressure not to.
Yeah. It was a weird decision, people thought at the time.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did it. I think the difference you make is huge, and glad you.
Well, right back at you.
Listened to yourself.
Right back at
Thank you.
Mirroring the people I talk to, and I would like to say something else. I would like to say thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your support. Thank you for what you give back. People really appreciate you and really enjoy you and really value you. And I hope you will remember that for yourself.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you. That means a lot to me. Thank you. And on behalf of myself and everyone listening, thank you for taking the time to join us here on speaklikealeader.show. And to those of you who are listening, I think you can probably see why I'm just so thrilled to have Fiona Murden in my life. And I hope that you've gotten a lot out of this conversation. And I hope you go check out FionaMurden.com. Find her on LinkedIn at /in/Fiona Murden. And, go out and be someone worth mirroring. How's that for a good take us out?
I love that. That's brilliant, John. Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. Thanks for joining us. And we'll talk to you. We'll hear you. We'll see you, however you want to say it, next time on speaklikealeader.show. Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.